Welcome to another edition of the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast. He is the professional legendino, Tim Vickery in Rio.
Yeah, and he is Dotun Adebayo, somewhere between London and Manchester, I suspect London. And I'm very glad he's joined me, and we've got others to join me to celebrate my second birthday, because we are going back to May the 25th, 1967, 2 years to the day after Muhammad Ali fought for the first time as Muhammad Ali.
And you remember it as a 2-year-old, obviously.
Yeah, it's, you were all in green, as I recall. And he did that on May the 25th, 1965. That was no phantom punch, and no phantom punch was my arrival on the planet. And 2 years later,
yes,
equally as remarkable happened in the world of football.
And it was no phantom punch either. So
certainly wasn't. Certainly wasn't.
No,
we are talking about the Lisbon Lions. We are talking about not only the first British team to win the European Cup, as the Champions League was then known, but the first Northern European team to do it. Something which was really, really groundbreaking. And every last man jock of them, do you see what I did there?
Yeah, I saw what you did.
Was hailed from the area around the stadium, and there was one who might have been from like 25 miles away, and he was practically a foreigner. So we're talking about the kind of team that in today's football, in today's globalized football, you just don't get, you know. And if and Harry Kane is one of our own at Tottenham.
Yeah,
and you think he's one of our own because there are so few of them, because the players come from the far-flung corners of the world. Not the case with this Celtic side, which fascinates me. The Celtic side that beat Inter Milan 2-1 in Lisbon, the Lisbon Lions, on May the 25th, 1967. That's what we're going to be talking about tonight.
Well, let's introduce a jock into the conversation. Did you see what I did there, Tim?
Yeah, you picked up the ball and ran with it.
Well, Hugh MacDonald is a legend of football writing north of Hadrian's Wall. He has worked for the Herald in Scotland for over 30 years as sports writer, and he joins us now. Hugh, welcome to the programme.
Hi, great to be on. Great to be on, Dotun. Thanks very much. And great to be on with Tim as well. I've followed the broadcast and Tim's coverage from South America for so many years, so it's great to be on with you all.
Well, one legend to another, as it were. Do you remember 25th of May, 1967?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was 12. And you know how we say things about football and we say our great memories about football, and we talk and we say, yeah, but I mean, that was our football memories. There's more important things in life. And, you know, I would say without a doubt, at 65 years old now and looking back in my life, that would be one of the greatest days of my life, full stop. Obviously, having children and grandchildren trumps that.
Of course.
Absolutely. And having that great love in your life that they can bring and that endures and sustains you. So absolutely. But if you're talking about outside that, yeah, Lisbon Lions 67 is there. You know, that'd be yeah, one of my top memories of life. And the interesting thing as well about it, Dotun, is the way that it's accompanied me through life for the 50 odd years, 53 years since. It has, if anything, the Lisbon Lions has certainly gained in mythology and legend, but probably gained in significance. And it was just one of those. I could take you absolutely right through the day. That day of May the 25th is
Go on then.
Maybe that is not what the listeners.
No. I genuinely would love to hear what your diary is of that day.
Well, the funny thing about that day is that you'll probably know the background of Celtic and Rangers in Glasgow, and there's a sort of schism. And Celtic would be seen as the Catholic team. That's no longer really applicable, if it ever was. And it's all a club open for all and all that. But certainly amongst Roman Catholics in Scotland, Celtic in Glasgow, certainly Celtic would be the team. And that day was what they call up here a holiday of obligation, right? Which meant that Catholic schools, you got a holiday, you didn't have to go to school. it was a feast day, and so your school was off. So not only did Celtic win on that beautiful day, but we all had a day off for it. You know, we had a day off for it. Another thing was the other great thing about it. In 1967, we didn't have a telly. You know, this sounds now. It's almost like I'm expecting the producer to add a violin chorus to this. We didn't have a telly, so they opened the primary school for us to go up and watch the game on the television. The football team, the primary school team, came up to the gym. So I watched it in there with my mates, and I also watched it with 12 stitches in my chin, because my Twitter handle is Red Blaze, and Red Blaze is that red ash that we used to play football on. And my younger brother had tripped me up that morning when we were playing, and I did that cartoon Tom and Jerry thing where you slide across the park on your chin. And I got up with two chins, and I had to have them sewn together. And my two chins sewn together, I went up to St Joseph's up in Busby and watched that match.
Sounds like a memorable day in all sorts of ways. Do you remember that red ash, Tim? The red ash that he talks about, that they used to make us play football on.
We used to play on grass, as I recall. Yeah, we didn't have a TV either, or a washing machine, or a fridge, or a telephone, or a car, but we did have grass to play. What fascinates? There's so many things about this team that fascinates me, and what I want is like, just where did it come from? How was this possible? But also throw into the mix, and you mentioned there that Celtic are a team for all comers. Jock Stein, the great coach, the man who formed this team, he was a Protestant. Yep. Was that relevant? And how can we explain that team of local lads coming together?
Well, it was relevant in one sense, in that the great myth about Stein, and it might be a myth infused with some degree of truth, was that he left Celtic when he was coaching Celtic because he felt that was as high as he would get, that they wouldn't employ a Roman Catholic a non-Roman Catholic manager. Whether that's truthful or not, I don't know. But that was certainly the feeling. So when he did come back, he came back possibly almost certainly actually as the first non-Roman Catholic Celtic manager. But of course, Celtic had always had non-Roman Catholic players. I mean, it was, from Bertie Peacock and Bobby Evans who played with Stein at Celtic. So there was not a problem there. They were a club that would pick all denominations and all colours. I mean, we know that Gil Scott-Hearn's father, for example, played for Celtic. So it was a very inclusive club that way. But Stein, certainly, there was a feeling that Stein felt that he'd gone as far as he could as Celtic as reserve team coach, and so had to go to Hibs and Dunfermline to be a manager. And then came back, and he came back with Celtic basically on their knees, saying, can you come and manage this team? Because it was a catastrophic period of underachievement. And Stein came back, but Stein came back able to say to the board, right, you want me back. And remember, this is the early 60s, or middle 60s, 65. And he's saying to them, you want me back, but this team's not going to be picked by the board, as it was under the previous manager, Jimmy McGrory. See, if I come back and you want me back, I pick the team. You have nothing to do with the team at all. I'm the man. I'm the boss, which is now, it's now routine, that, isn't it? Every manager, reserves the right to pick the team. But that was revolutionary for Celtic.
It's like Alf Ramsey with England. Exactly the same thing when Alf Ramsey.
Yeah, exactly after Walter Winterbottom. Absolutely. This thing that, I'll live and die by my decisions. And the crucial thing, Timmy, going your second, where did this all come from? Was there's this great idea that Stein, from people outside Scotland, that Stein revamped the actual personnel of the team. He didn't. Largely, the Lisbon Lions, were, apart from Willie Wallace, were there when Stein arrived. I mean, there were Steen, there were players that Steen had coached at Celtic earlier, and there were players that had done, hadn't done very well, actually. And Steen changed them immediately into a team that won the 1965 Scottish Cup, which was probably one of his more significant victories because it taught them they could win. And the next season, crucially, they got to the semi-finals of the European Cup Winners' Cup and went out to a very good Liverpool team. Very unluckily to a good Liverpool team as well, was offside goals, blah, 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 blah. So the genius of Steen was not that he revamped a team by bringing in players. The genius of Steen was that he used what he had already, rejigged it completely. He put people in different positions. And we'll talk about this later. He put up more tactical formation. He changed everything tactically, and most importantly, and I think all managers do this, all great managers do this, he changed the mentality of the team, and that's what he did.
Who were the Lisbon Lions that we've talked about a moment or two ago? On the match report in the Guardian the day after, they said, amongst other things, that there wasn't one hero. This was a team full of heroes. Every man on the pitch made a contribution to this victory. Yeah,
I would have said, I had this a job to do a few years ago, Dotun, where they were doing a big celebratory, book on the Lisbon Lions, and somebody said to me, my conceit was to do a match report from 1967, and they gave me the DVD, and it really is a conceit, because how can you do a match report when you know the result? But what it did do was made me watch it very, very carefully and take notes. And I would say that the man of the match in the 67 team for Celtic was John Clark, who nobody would say was, if you went round, he was a great player. He played, for the listeners, he played the sort of like sweeper role alongside Billy McNeill, who's probably the greatest ever Celt in terms of reputation, not in terms of just playing ability, but I would say McNeill was the greatest ever Celt, and Clark played alongside him in a sort of like cleaning up role, but that day he was just superb.
He had to be, didn't it? Because the way that Inter played was, if they get one up, deep defence, but they'll do you on the counter-attack.
Exactly that. And he was so clever. And if you look at the Celtic team that day, I think what's most important with what Steen, I've thought a lot about this over the years, is what Steen did, and we'll come to that later, in changing football. We all know that in big competitions, whether it's a World Cup or a Champions League now, there are certain results that can change the culture of football. I remember in 67, the culture of football would be the best team in Europe would be looked upon then as Inter Milan, El Grande Inter, under Helenio Herrera, a very innovative coach, a very dedicated coach, but one who was committed to catching action, was committed to defensive play, and also came on the back of a World Cup victory by an English team, which would be best described as pragmatic. It wasn't an England team that was going to score 4, 5, 6, 7. It was an England team, although they did score 4 for them to win the World Cup. But it wasn't a team.
A bit of Scottish bias there, Dotun.
Yeah, but I think it's fair to say, Tim, they were an England team that was more about functionality rather than entertainment. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. I've got nothing against that, but that sometimes can change the culture of football. But I think Steen's probably biggest influence in football was the way he influenced the Dutch for total football. But now the way his fullbacks played in 67, the way his fullbacks played in 67 was as auxiliary attackers.
Yeah.
That was never the case. And if you've seen the two goals, one goal is scored by a fullback, the equaliser.
Got lots during the campaign, Tommy Gemmell.
Yep, and the other one was laid on by a fullback coming up, Jim Craig coming up, knocking the ball back across the 18-yard line, Bobby Murdoch hits it, Steve Chalmers diverts it in. So the fullbacks were absolutely crucial to creating goals. So that was very innovative.
Because you think of the fullbacks as, or the modern sort of wing backs as being a very modern sort of development in football, rather than from what I remember.
Inter had one. Inter had one of the first great attacking fullbacks, Vickery.
Yeah,
but I think he's got his hands full with little Jimmy Johnston.
Yeah, that was one of the crucial aspects tactically of the game. And Steen said to Johnston as well, move about. And it's funny, if you look at the game, Johnston was probably, certainly, that terrible word, iconic, but he was certainly one of the most heroic Celtic players. Celtic, there would be a time in the 60s where people would be asked who their favourite Celtic player was, and nobody would say Jimmy Johnston, because it was just taken that, of course, it was Jimmy Johnston, but who was it after Jimmy Johnston? You know, it was taken for granted that you know, if you supported Celtic, I mean, Johnston was.
I love that moment, Hugh, when the teams are walking out, and Johnson. It looks like Johnson's picking out Vickery.
Yeah,
he's giving it the old. See you, Jimmy. You're going to be marking me. No, he's giving it loud, even before the game started. What a declaration of intent! Just to set the scene here, and Inter, they'd won the cup in two of the previous 3 seasons. And Herrera, you mentioned, he was the Jose Mourinho of his day, wasn't he? That's what he was. Looking at the game, I think Inter suffered from scoring too early. They got a very, very soft penalty. And by the standards of the time, I don't think anyone would ever see a penalty there. And the Celtic players were enraged to concede it. But it meant, the way that they played, from modern point of view, Inter's defensive tactics are stupid. Because they go so deep, and that means that every time they come forward, they've got to get forward 80 meters and then get back again. And by the end, they're tired. And both of the goals happen because they're defending right on top of their goalkeeper. They got away with it for a fair while in the game because they had an excellent keeper. But in the end, and it reminded me a little bit of watching Italy versus Brazil in the 70 final, because Italy did the same thing. And by the end of the game, they're just on their knees because every time they go forward, they've got 80 meters to go back and then sit on top of their crossbar like a team of bats. Whereas you watch Celtic and you are watching like modern football.
Yeah. And it's interesting you bring up Brazil there as well, this 1970 team, which would be, from people of my age, the greatest national team I'd ever saw. And I had the pleasure of talking to Carlos Alberto Pereira, who was a fitness coach for them in 1970 before he went on to be a coach who won the World Cup as manager of Brazil. But he was just a fitness coach there working for Zagallo. And what he said was that when you're watching the Brazil team, you just think you're watching beautiful football all the time. You're watching great talent, the sport itself almost whimsically, capriciously on the park. He said, but 2 things were central to that. He said, we got them fitter than they'd ever been before. Yeah. We worked their socks off for 3 months so that we knew they were the fittest team at the World Cup. And said, tactically, we were very aware as well. He says, we were a team that worked a lot on not having the ball. And Steen's team, you could watch Steen's team and say, oh, this is just off-the-cuff stuff. But of course it wasn't. Steen was very tactically astute. Everybody knew precisely what they had to do, and they were very, very fit.
Yeah, the fitness was important for this final, but does it undermine the skill of Scotland, and particularly the engine after that early knockout blow near knockout blow from the penalty? You'd have thought that it would have knocked the stuffing out of them, and yet they seem to rise to the challenge and give even more then. And the entire length of the rest of the duration of the match, they seem to be outrunning Inter Milan in every department.
Yeah, I think fitness was certainly crucial, Dotun. I mean, I think they were a very, very fit team. And of course, they had so much of the ball that the Inter were doing a lot of the chasing, and that's almost more debilitating. But one thing about the team as well is, and I got to know them over the years as personalities. I mean, these guys are hard bees. These guys are These guys are what we call up here solid citizens, right? These are not the kind of guys, they're very humble and decent people. I was talking to a mate of mine today before this, we'd had a spot lunch, and I was talking about coming on here, and he knows them much better than I do. And there's this idea, they're all really nice guys, and they're very good with support, great with their time. But these are not guys that you want to pick a fight with. Right? So these are
Stevie
guys
Chalmers recovered from tuberculosis. Isn't that part of his story?
Sorry?
Didn't Stevie Chalmers, who scored the winner?
Yes, Stevie Chalmers had given a death sentence, told he was put in a hospital, Belvedere in Glasgow, and say, this is a ward where people don't leave and step in a shroud. So he came from that. John Clark came home one day at the age of 10 and told that his father had died in an accident, and he was now the man of the house. So he had to bring some money in, whether it be part-time jobs or whatever, 10 years of age. I mean, these were all boys who were, we talked about where they came from, 30 miles from Glasgow. Most of them are Glasgow and Lancashire boys. The exile, the exotic import was Bobby Lennox, who came from Saltcoats, all of 30 miles away from Glasgow city centre. So these guys were hard characters. I mean, you will know this yourself, Tim, if you ever talk to a foreign journalist, they look up Rothman's books to see where Scottish footballers were born. They always say, Bells Hill must be the most, certainly at one time, must have been the greatest place for producing, better than Sao Paulo or the favelas of Rio de Janeiro. Bells Hill was the greatest place in the world for producing footballers. Why? Because everybody in Lanarkshire, there was only one maternity hospital, and it was in Bells Hill. So if you look through your books now and you look at George Graham, George Orden, Jimmy Johnston, the list, Davy Cooper of Rangers, just go down that list. Obviously, they were all from Bells Hill, and they were all of a type that they were brought through in an era where, what's the euphemism now? You have to earn the right to play, which basically meant you had to, if teams wanted to kick you, you'd just kick them a bit harder. And that was, I mean, it was that happened in English football. If you look at, everybody would go on about how brilliant the Manchester United team of 1968 were. But I would say that you wouldn't want to have a fight with Paddy Crerand or Dennis Law. The Scots people in that team. The Leeds team of 1970.
Billy Bremner.
You wouldn't be tussling with Billy Bremner. If you or Joe Jordan or Gordon McQueen. So there was this. For example, here's the thing. Up here, Dotun, we've got this thing that used to be. There was a progression, and we've got this thing called junior football, which has nothing to do with the age. It's like a sort of semi-pro stuff in villages and towns, and it's really like homicide with a ball, basically.
Murder ball. We used to call it murder.
Yeah, it's like the great shout at junior football is never mind the ball, get on with the game. So what a lot of these Celtic players had been with, they had been signed with Celtic because of their enormous talents, but they had played junior football, and they'd played junior football as very young teenagers, like 15-year-olds. Like John Clark played for Larkhall Thistle when he was 15. I mean, I've played junior football, and I wouldn't send Mike Tyson and his pomp to play junior football. Never mind a 15-year-old kid. I really wouldn't.
I got two questions based on that. One, why didn't that great Celtic team, who also reached the final of the cup a few years later, when they were a bit surprised by Feyenoord, people hadn't realised how much the Dutch football were progressing. Why didn't that great Celtic team lead to a great Scotland side at that time? And second, where has it gone?
Yeah. First of all, it probably did lead to a pretty decent Scotland team at the time, because just after Lisbon, we famously were, and it's shamefully neglected by you.
I know what you're going to say.
We were
Jack Charlton spent the game.
We were world champions, and now you're coming out.
Wing.
Yeah, you're coming out with all these sort of lame excuses, lame being the operative word, Tim. You're coming out with all this Jack Charlton had a sore toe. Come on, it's professional football, man. You know, grow up. Man up here, as the young people say. No, the Scotland team remains for me, Tim, and it's not just 67 and beyond. I'm talking about 63 to 67.
Mm-hmm.
Remains one of the great one of them is complete and utter mismanagement, in that they hired managers who wouldn't manage, and so you had little cliques and people not really prepared to play for the team. I mean, for the 1962 World Cup, they were knocked out in a playoff by Czechoslovakia, who ended up getting to the final. So they were pretty decent, but I think you could write, and people have written books about the Scottish football team and how they didn't progress because of that wonderful talent, not just from Celtic. The Rangers team in '67 got to the final of the European Cup Winners' Cup and were beaten after extra time.
Was it hard to make a team from Rangers and Celtic players?
Yeah, it was even harder because you had to throw something else into the mix as well, Tim. And that was what we called up the Anglos.
Yeah.
The Anglos.
Who were they?
Well, here's the story, Dotun. I weep salt tears now when I'm watching Scotland. Right, I weep salt tears, and I weep salt tears not by watching them, by looking at the team sheet, and just saying it. I remember as a kid, and this is a gospel truth, and people of my age will tell you this, that they used to have huge arguments in the Scottish press about whether or not we picked Denis Law for the team.
Mm.
And whether or not Billy Bremner should be allowed in the team. Right?
Okay.
Why? Because they were Anglos, right? And did they have the proper, they were almost like traitorous. They'd left Scotland to go away and earn their money elsewhere. So did they really deserve to play for Scotland? I mean, you're not talking about guys like Ollie McBurney and that were going down on their knees before now, or Liam Cooper or Leeds United. Fair enough. We're talking about having conversations with Ian St. John, Denis Law, and Billy Bremner should be graced with a Scotland strip. This continued, and people will not believe this, but I know it to be true because I was there, as they say.
I remember those debates. It was sometimes said that the Scotland national team were only focused on the England game.
Yeah.
And didn't give the same focus for World Cup qualifiers.
No.
Fair comment?
Absolutely. And you're talking about also is about availability. There was a real feeling in the Scotland teams, that particularly the Anglos, and I think it's true now as well. I think most of you talk to them now, they weren't exactly encouraged to turn up for matches. They weren't. I mean, managers down there like Don Revie, etc., weren't exactly shoving them up the road and delivering them first class to the Scotland squad. They were saying to themselves, "Do you know that little hammy you've got? Can we upgrade that to a sort of amputated left ankle? So this was a constant thing about international football, the amount of call-offs there was, and then the amount of disillusion as well. If you were a really serious player and you were going along and you saw the shambles you were walking into, I mean, if you were an Ian St. John, for example, who'd just been infused in the ways of Bill Shankly, and what you had to eat and do, and the effort you had to give to even get a shirt on your back, and if you turned up at Scotland and there was 20, you're shoved at the back of the plane as the Blazers went up front. If you were, if the whole thing seemed to be, picked by some kind of committee, and there was sort of astonishing decisions made over selection, it tends to sort of like wane the enthusiasm, doesn't it?
And the other one, where's it gone? Why aren't the Glasgow equivalent of Bow Bells producing the calibre of players that Jock Stein moulded in '67?
My answer is there's not enough. My answer simply is there's not enough kids playing enough football. There's kids playing, bits of football, and outside I can hear, and I've got a big park outside, and there's kids out there, and it's great. I'm not being snobbish about this. There's kids out there with bibs and replica strips and miniature goalposts with really good coaches, young guys that have got coaching, certificates, etc., and they're playing out there. They maybe play football, they maybe do that coaching, say, every second night, so every second weekday night, so they do 6 hours of sorts of football coaching. We would do 6 hours of football every day. Every day. You would do 6 hours. I mean, people say, you're talking a lot of crap. But we would do more in the summer holidays, obviously, because what happened in the summer holidays? What happened to Dalgleish, Johnston, Law, St John, and Hugh MacDonald in the summer holidays was that your mother had a very small house with a lot of kids in it, and you were basically told to leave the house very early and not come back.
You go out at sunrise and you come back at sundown.
Come back in time to get something.
So many other countries have been through these same social changes.
Yeah.
And their football hasn't declined in terms of the quality of the players, the way that Scotland, Scotch football has. So there must be some other reason.
Yeah, I think the other quirk is that the vast demographic of, remember we're only a small country, 5 million, but the vast demographic was every working class kid was a football player. Everyone, right? Now you would see very few working class kids play football. And I say that, and I feel a heaviness coming over me when I say it, because football has now become, in many ways, a middle class game. And in many ways, it's become an expensive game. And it's become a game where a lot of times you relied on parents picking you up and dropping you off and paying a tenner for the hall or a tenner for the coach and all that. So if you're a working class kid, you're not doing that. You're just not doing that. And I know that applies in other countries, but if you're a working class kid, it seems to be in my travels around the world, and you'll know that much better than this in South America. Yeah, the working class kids haven't got an access to all that, but they're out in the streets doing it. They're still doing it. We don't have that. Now that access to football has gone, the parks have shut. The only way you can play in a park now is if, under the facilities is to be organised, get the Janny to pay the janitors, to pay the coaches and all that. And working class kids in Scotland, which generally were the makeup, like 99% would be working class kids. I mean, St John, lost his father early and lived in Motherwell. Jimmy Johnston from Lanarkshire, even Kenny from Milton in Glasgow, a very deprived area. If you talk about 99% of them working class kids, if you look at the kids coming through in Scotland now and get into the national team, you're talking about Stuart Armstrong, who wants to be a lawyer,
Could it be also, Hugh, that to a certain extent, we talked about the hard men of Scottish football, that working class kids aren't that hard anymore? I don't mean to be disrespectful. I know that it's still hard if your parents are struggling and your environment is difficult, but it's not the Gorbals, if you see what I mean. It's not the hard men that you talked about that face Inter Milan in this European Cup final. And given that, if that is the case, isn't there an argument that Scottish football has somewhat lost its identity in that respect?
I agree totally. It's lost its identity. And one of the things about working class kids now is they might come from homes that are really desperately dysfunctional, through alcohol and drug abuse, which has soared, over the last maybe 20 years. Whereas the disadvantages that I would have grown up and a lot of players were growing up would be that stuff, right? We didn't have a telly, right? We didn't, we didn't have boots or anything. I mean, having football, which was like, I could write 2,000 words in my first pair of proper football boots and have that kind of stuff. And I'm not trying to get the violin out, but that was the way of it. Now, see, one of the interesting things now, like a lot of kids, and it's really struck me, Dotun, is really heartbreaking, is that I went down to an academy, a football academy, one Christmas, and I was down to give a speech, and I was asked by the guy who came down to ask me to give a speech. He said, "Could you bring a gift?" Well, what we do is you bring down a gift for a kid, you know, and he said, "Could you bring a gift for a 10-year-old boy?" And I said, "Yeah, fine." So during the thing is all this primary school came in and they sang Christmas carols, and I said, "Oh, how beautiful," and all that. And then they all walked up and took these gifts on the way out. And I said, "Oh, how sweet, you know, these lovely little kids. I've given one of them a gift and all that." And I turned around to the head teacher and I said, "What a little sweet thing." And she answered pretty succinctly, "That's not sweet. For a lot of them, that's a Christmas present. That's Christmas. That's Merry Christmas for a lot of them." And for a lot of them as well, and you see Marcus Rashford knows this only too well. For all of them as well, is that was their Christmas dinner that day. You know, maybe December the 17th. But that was their kids. That was turkey and all the trimmings and trifle and all that. So the effects on working class people are what we call the non-working class now, not in a derogatory way, because that's there, they don't work and they can't work. There's nothing there for them. It's been so depressing that it's extinguished things like football.
Listen, I want to try and bring this section of the conversation to a conclusion. I'd like to ask you a couple of quick questions, and feel free to chip in, Tim, as well. First of all, it must irritate the socks off you that one of those sort of pub quiz questions in the rest of the country, shall we say, is which was the first British team to win the European Cup? Because most people south of the border are going to say Man United.
Yeah, it's an interesting one though. Tim talked about it in the introduction about how revolutionary it was, and if you look at the previous winners of that tournament, you know, I think I'm correct in saying it was Inter, Benfica, and Real were the only teams that had won before. So it's pretty high caliber stuff. And without even getting into that sort of parochial arguments we have, and they can be fun about Scotland and England. You've got to remember that Celtic won the European Cup long before any Dutch team, almost 10 years before any German team. So it's astonishing, really. But one of the factors that makes it sort of slightly less astonishing was the strength individually of Scottish football players then. That you could have 11 collectively that could play for one club side. And imagine if they'd been a Russian team or a Romanian team and they could have called in all Scots at that time. You could have had the Lisbon Lions with Billy Brenner, Dennis Law, Paddy Crerand, Ian St John, Ron Yates. We could go on and on the bench. That was the strength of Scottish individuals at the time. You know, this wasn't just a little freak 11 that all coalesced at one time. It was in many ways, but there'd be another 10, 12 players that would say, "Do you know what? We could have played that. We're Scots, and we would have." I mean, Billy Brenner, for example, was famously rejected by Celtic. You know what happens, and so he could have been about there. It just shows you the depth in playing. The number of really good players that we had.
Perhaps it was a bar that was set that for a nation of 5 million, with industrial decline to come.
Yeah.
Perhaps it was a bar that was set that was not sustainable. In which case, I kind of feel sorry for you, Hugh, hitting your peak at 12.
No, well, this has been.
I never said that, mate.
Listen, and if only Tim, and if only that was restricted to my football following, that may have been quite palatable. It's been like my career has been the equivalent of a ski jump that ends just before the jump. But yeah, I mean, but one of the things that's quite funny about this, I've been talking about this with my brothers and all that, because we're all the same age. And in many ways, Celtic in the next 5 or 6 years should have won 2, probably could have won 3 European Cup, and might have won 4 or even 5 if they'd been really lucky, right? And I can go through all the but we've come to this conclusion, as football fans do, that one of them was just perfect. You know, why this Lisbon is this little diamond, this little rubbed gem, right? This little perfectly put diamond that we have. I was getting all excited there, so I came off screen. Yeah, this little diamond that deserves no further burnishing, and to win any more would just have been. It's just been too much. It's been over egging the pudding, Tim.
Yeah, it's winning all the time is for mediocre people.
Yeah, yeah.
Glory.
Yeah.
As one, speaking as one who's never experienced it, I can imagine enjoying it every time, though. Do you know what Sir Alf Ramsey said? Remember, this was a year after England had won the World Cup. Do you know what he said about the Celtic victory?
I know what Alf Ramsey said when he arrived at Glasgow Airport. And
yes.
The official from the Scottish FA said, "Welcome to Scotland, Mr. Ramsey." I know what he said then. You must be fucking joking.
He was very astute about geography as well, Tim. He once said that the only good thing about Scotland was the road down south.
Well, no, he nicked that one off Dr. Johnson, didn't he? He nicked that one straight out of Boswell's diaries, I seem to remember as well.
Was he happy for Celtic in '67, Dotun?
Imagine he's been cornered in Vienna, where the England team are about to take on Austria. It's on a Saturday, and he says, "Look, I don't normally comment on the performances of other teams. I don't normally comment on the performances of other teams, but having watched the match on television, I got the impression that Celtic completely outclassed Inter. Celtic had more determination, speed, stamina, and enthusiasm. And this is the bit that gets me, the final line. This is the punchline. The England players were delighted. So was I." He's got a sense of humour. He's got a sense of humour, as we say.
Yeah.
Yeah, classic match. It's already got a Brazilian shirt name, you know. So all we need now is a Brazilian shirt name for Hugh MacDonald.
We do.
Let's leave that to our listeners.
Aye.
That's his impression of Jock Stein, by the way.
It's Bill Shankly, really. It's Bill Shankly who said on this occasion,
of course it is.
He turned to Jock Stein, he said, "Aye, John, you're immortal." And he is.
Yep. And it's quite funny that the size of Scotland and sort of maybe its impact on the game. There's a great picture of Hugh McIlvanney guiding Billy McNeil back to the dressing room. And in that dressing room, isn't it incredible that McIlvanney, for me, the greatest sports writer ever, including the great Americans like Red Smith and Liebling, etc. But anyway, McIlvanney went into the dressing room on the coattails of Shankly and actually heard that exchange, you know, and of course Shankly, God bless him, was completely and utterly devastated by Celtic in many ways, because he's a competitive football manager and he wanted Liverpool to be the first British team to win the European Cup.
We've got some suggestions for Brazilian shirt names for Jock Stein. This one's from one of our subscribers, Paul, who says Jock Stein should be Jocrates because he fancies him and Socrates having a conversation on a high level. But it could be the Brazilian Socrates. I don't know which.
No.
Yeah, it probably is. I mean, the Brazilian Socrates said that winning is for the mediocre.
Yeah.
He would have been happy with one day of glory in Lisbon. That would have done him.
You actually nicked that line, Tim.
Adapted. Always adapt from the best.
That's right.
It. A couple of suggestions from Neil, who says Leonidas or local Herino.
Oh, right.
She's making it, not bad, for Jock Stein, not bad. And there's one more, João Mineiro. rather than the Mineiro because he
Yeah.
worked down a mine.
Yep, absolutely. And he would have been very pleased to have any kind of Brazilian connection, because he was a great lover of Brazilian football, and obviously he was a great lover of that 1970 team. That anybody who had a set of eyes would be a great lover of that 1970 team as well.
And Jock Stein, he was a coach of Scotland in '82, wasn't he? When he made a big mistake against Brazil.
Mm.
He got his team to score first. It just made him angry.
Well, that was, and do you know, I do a show up here in Scotland with Alan Ruff, who was in goals that day, and was beaten by Zico's free kick and all this. And he said there's great mythology about it later that everybody's saying, oh, you know, we got them angry. He says, actually, at the time, he says, we were berating the for scoring. We were saying, for God's sake, what you did. He says it was because it was so warm in Seville. He says, and the Brazilians were just padding about, and we knew how good they were, and they were outclassing us. He said, but they weren't really at it. He said, and as soon as that goal went, he said, we just went, oh, no, this is going to be the longest night ever. And it was. It was. Well, Tim, we could ask you one question. Would maybe that the best Brazilian team never to have won a World Cup?
I think you can pick holes in them. When Jock Stein did. Look how he, in that '82 game, look how he used John Walk.
Yeah.
He used him wide, getting behind the left back, Junior. Yeah. And that's where the goal came from. And Scotland had one or two opportunities in that space behind the fullbacks. And that's where Italy did them. Italy switched from one flank to the other to behind the attacking fullbacks. The centre forward didn't speak the same language as the midfield. It was a great midfield. The goalkeeper wasn't particularly brilliant. So they're the most aesthetically pleasing side, just because the midfield was sensational. The way that they moved the ball was just something to dream about. But maybe there have been better teams. But you know, it's football. It ain't what you do; it's the way that you do it. It's the memories that you leave. And I did interviews with almost all of those players from '82, and they still get fan mail from all over the world. They didn't even reach the semi-finals, you know, because the way that they did it just enchanted people and continues to enchant.
Yeah.
So we need a Brazilian shirt name for our guest, Hugh MacDonald of the Herald in Scotland. Hopefully, we'll have it by this time next week, Hugh, and you can wear it proudly as well. I really appreciate it.
I love that, because I do. One of my mates goes over to Brazil on a regular basis as an agent, and he always comes back with Brazilian club shirts for me. So this will be a tremendous one to add to my collection.
Believe me, it will be a classic, I'm sure. Listeners will work their magic on it, and you'll have the Brazilian shirt name hopefully this time next week.
Magic.
Thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure speaking to you about this.
It's been great. I mean, as you can guess from this, Dotun, I would speak about this, and I'll break over my coffin lid to speak about this.
We should do one of those documentaries that they do on TV where you gather everybody together, as many people still around that were there for that match, and do it from their perspectives as well as yours as well.
Yeah. But one of these things is, you know, about football, just finishing, you'll know yourself about following a club. There's certain things that follow you right to the end, and I'm glad that 67 was there. It's a funny thing. I'll finish with this: that anytime you go to Lisbon, right? And I used to go to Lisbon obviously a lot as a job in Benfica, Sporting Club, watch them. But I once went with my son, and of course we're going to make the pilgrimage. This is very much a Celtic thing. You make the pilgrimage to the National Stadium, which of course is this beautiful, like, bucolic setting outside of Lisbon rather than in the main stadium in Lisbon itself. But if you turn up at that stadium, right, there's a whole little business enterprise of local punters there who immediately say to you, "You're from Glasgow, eh?" And they organise you get into this thing for €10. You get into the dressing rooms, you sneak in, and you walk around the park, and they organise a taxi for you back into the town. So So this is one hand crossing these, as we still crossing the oceans, Scots, and add to the add to the culture of other nations.
Listen, mate, it's a pleasure, like I say, and great to hear the sort of like positive sort of feelings about this, even like 3 years on.
Yeah.
You have such a great memory and so much positivity in your memory. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. It was great to meet you as well, and it's great to be on this broadcast, because it's a superb listen. Maybe not this week, it won't be, but I apologise to everybody. I said,
oh no,
this will make the other one sound better. So I'm working my shirt for that.
No, I should have told you it's not over yet. You see, your bit is done. Now we're going to make it sound really great. Now I'm only kidding. Nowhere near. Hugh, thank you very much.
Thank you. Good to meet you.
Cheers. Pleasure, mate. First of all, a pleasure having Hugh MacDonald with us, Tim.
Wasn't it?
We're looking at the 25th of May, 1967. Do you know what was on the front page of the papers? What the big story was?
Me being 2 years old?
No, nobody's mentioned that, funny enough.
Story? I can't believe it.
I did search up and down, but absolutely no mention of that at all.
Conspiracy theory.
It's like they didn't give a shit.
What did they give a shit about?
Well, at the time, it was the deepening crisis in the Middle East, because this was after the 7-Day War, or the 6-Day War, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Israel
it's just coming up.
The Arab states. So there's a lot of sort of Arab anger about the whole thing, and there's talk of a blockade if one hasn't already started in the Gulf, amongst other things. And then there's another story that about a woman who had the wrong leg cut off, and this was at East Birmingham Hospital. A surgeon cut off the woman's good leg. So how many legs did she have cut off, Tim?
Well, she had one leg cut off. Did she lose them both?
Of course. You cut off the good leg. The bad leg is still a problem.
Nigeria were just about to lose Biafra. That was about to kick off.
Well, I think this was, you're absolutely right. It was just about to kick off. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Nigeria is about to go into a civil war at this time. So lots going on. But we've been looking at what's been happening in the charts as well, the pop charts during that time. And it was a classic year, I suspect you would say, for the pop charts. You would say, being an old
What a time to be alive. What a time. I do regret it. I was only 2. Yeah, the thing that really gets me about the 60s is, especially the mid-60s, is the velocity of change. It's just extraordinary. It's one of the reasons I think that music and football were on different planets at this time. Partly because one of the things that is pushing the change, gotta say it, and Macca talks about this openly these days, is drugs. You know, and the Beatles have gone from rum and coke to weed
and coke. And coke?
No, I don't think so. I don't think that was big. It was LSD that they're already doing, and they're just about to release Sgt. Pepper.
Mm-hmm.
Which comes out about a week after this game. And much as I love Sgt. Pepper, there's something about it I regret, because it starts off the death or not the death, but the decline of the single.
The decline of the music hall as well, I'd have thought.
Yeah, well, Sgt. Pepper actually pays homage to music hall. Music hall's in there. But in terms of our music, a lot of bands then became focused on albums. I remember when we were kids, some of the bands who came after this, like Led Zeppelin or something, they wouldn't even release singles. It's one of the reasons that my generation hated them, because they didn't want to talk to us. You know, you haven't got money. You haven't got the money to save up for an album. You've got the money for a single, but they don't release it.
And that's the point, Tim, that far from killing off the single, in fact, the single probably had its heyday in the 1970s, to be honest.
Yeah, I think T-Rex do a great job of bringing it back.
Yes.
But for those, and Slade as well, but for those few years, not yet in 67, but when you get up to about 69 and so on, the quality of the singles declines massively, because a lot of the big players are much more focused on the album than they are the single.
Well, funny
What
enough,
we've got now is a great collection of singles.
but if you're talking about 68, 69, around that time, what keeps a lot of the music alive is a lot of Skinhead Moonstomp. Do you remember all of these things were happening down on the darker side of the street, if you like?
Well, yeah,
And
I mean, see, again, that's fascinating because the mod thing splits, doesn't it? It goes two ways. When the more, and a lot of it is on class terms, on the more middle class element goes into dandy and then goes into Indian and becomes hippie, and the hippie thing, it combines more with the heat of California than it does England. But anyway, and there you begin to see the movement into more intellectualized progressive rock and so on. Whereas the more working class element then goes the other way.
On the whole, I think you're right. Well, I did see one or two working class people going off to India, and it didn't sit right.
Sure. These are huge generalizations that we're dealing with.
Middle class kids in the skinhead movement as well. Yeah. But you're absolutely right. I think they do go two different ways, and then they're going to re-emerge or rejoin later on down the line. But at this point, certainly a lot of the skinheads and a lot of the music that I remember from this time was like Judge Dredd, you know, Big 7, Big 8, Big 9, or whatever it was, David Ansel Collins, Double Barrel. And that gets to number one, not at this time, maybe it's a couple of years later than this.
That's why I make the point about Sergeant Pepper. I think Sergeant Pepper is a key moment in the start of this separation.
But there were still singles between this point and T-Rex is the point I was trying to make. But this year, 1967, look, well, we're going to come on to the hippie dippy ones in just a moment. Silence is Golden could be, which is number one in the charts on this week, could be seen as a hippie dippy moment, but it's actually such a brilliant record.
It's a great song,
I don't know what it's about though. Don't know what it's about. You know, Silence is Golden. Yeah, we get that. Don't know what the rest of it is about. But the guitars, mate, it turns this one into pure magic, I think.
Yeah, it's a beautiful song. There's a kind of Beach Boys influence. With the harmonies. And the Beach Boys are at their height as well, haven't they? They've just done Pet Sounds, which Sgt. Pepper is a response to. So
and they're at number 4 in the charts with the Narcista.
Yes. So the creativity is just crackling all over the place.
It is, but like you mentioned the drug scene at the time, or if not the drug scene, the sort of psychedelic scene. Let me take it away from drugs, because I don't know if this band, you know, took drugs at that time or not. The Kinks, Waterloo Sunset. It's a beautiful song. It is a magical song. It's become an absolute classic. It's at number 2 in the charts. But because of this podcast, I thought, let me just check out the lyrics a little bit closer, because you never ever kind of get to the lyrics after sort of Waterloo Sunset, you know.
Terry and Julie.
Funny, yeah, Terry and Julie. But what is that about? They get 2 verses, and you don't quite know what it's about. Am I missing something here? Is it an English thing?
It just paints a picture. It's I love it. I listen to it quite a lot without paying a great deal of attention to lyrics, to be honest. But I just, because I love that part of town, and I imagine a summer night or late spring night, as this was.
It's not like it used to be, that part of town anymore, you know. It's worth a few bob now. You've got to have a few bob to live there.
Obviously, yeah. And you know, waiting for your girl to come out of the tube station or something like that. You know,
funny enough,
they're waiting.
No, they'd meet at Waterloo Station. He means the overground part, because there's that huge clock.
Yeah.
The overground part that, you know, dates used to meet under the clock. They say, we'll meet you under the clock, because Waterloo's such a big station. It's like Grand Central Station for us on a miniature scale. But so you'd meet under the clock, you know, you'd make a date there under the clock. Yeah. So anybody standing under the clock.
Isn't that fantastic?
It is. And to capture it.
A meeting place of the world, you know.
Yeah.
How many
but it's the chord changes. It's the chord changes in this that, you know, and he takes, I don't mean his vocals are particularly great.
No, I mean neither.
Ray Davies, not on this in any case. But it's the,
it
chord
works
changes, saves it.
There's a kind of plaintive thing about his voice.
Yeah. And very English as well.
Yeah.
In the voice.
As are another band that's in the charts, who kind of came up with them, with the Kinks, which is the Who. Where the Kinks are going all romantic with Waterloo Sunset, the Who have decided, you know what's missing from these pop charts? Let's have a song about wanking. That's what we need.
Well, hang on a second.
Well, that's what it is.
It may be, but I didn't.
It is explicitly.
It may be. But I'm just saying, I don't know about that.
But
Yeah,
it is.
now
Talk about it.
I'm
But
so embarrassed because I was going
right. You know, it's like, how can we expand the universe of things that songs are talking about? Which, you know, the Beatles are doing with Sgt. Pepper. They're taking it back to childhood and sometimes a drug-addled vision of childhood. And, you know, the Who are thinking, well, how can we expand our vocabulary? I know. Let's do a song about wanking.
I'm so naive. I'm so naive. Let me just say straight away, I was going to ask you, what is this song about? It just goes to show you knew all about it already. I am so naive. I was thinking, anyway, David Bowie does a better version of that. Pictures of Lily. Yeah, he does actually. You've ruined it for me now. You know that. Flipping heck. How can I ever listen to that again? Completely ruined.
Self-abuse, I suppose, to listen to it again.
To save the day, Sandy Shaw is at number 5 with na 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 na, like a puppet on a string, whatever.
I don't think it's about wanking. I don't think there's any self-abuse in that one.
I have met Sandy Shaw. In fact, I spent an evening with Sandy Shaw doing a kind of a game show that never got off the ground.
Did you tread on her foot?
No, I didn't tread on her foot. I
just
did all the jokes. But the joke is that my older brother, who literally only contacts me maybe once every 10 years, he happened to call. You know, I'm in this sort of like, you know, pilot for a game show. And then I feel my phone buzzing. I look at my phone and my brother's calling me and I can't believe it. So all I can think of is texting him, say, can't speak now. I've got Sandy Shaw next to me.
Did he think Sandy Shaw was rhyming slang or something?
Well, yeah, maybe he probably did. I don't think he replied.
Because I've heard, you know, the Sandy McNabs. You know, I can't speak now. I'm with the Sandy McNabs.
I didn't know. This was a real thing because I did go out for a drink with her afterwards as well. You know, not just me. Her husband was there, by the way. I hasten to add. But it was a complete novelty song. I think she does a good job of it, but it's a complete pointless MC Eurovision song.
Yeah,
it's an oompa. In those days, they thought, oh, I know what those continental love. They'll have a big old French horn, won't they? So oompa, like a puppet on a string. I think we can get rid of that one straight away. But at number 7 is a blinder of a tune by the Dubliners called 7 Drunken Nights. Now, you've already talked about masturbating. Do you want to take this one on then?
No, I don't, because I don't really know the song.
You don't know it?
No, not really.
You don't know? Oh, it's an amazing, it's like a folk song, but you know, like
that's probably why I've never bothered looking it up.
No, it's a brilliant song, mate. I thought you'd at least listen to that one out of all these songs. Only 10 songs.
Sorry.
That was the best one in the whole charts. You would love it. And the joke about it is they start off saying, well, this is called 7 Drunken Nights, but we're only allowed to sing 5 of them. This is why I thought you'd want to take it up after all that masturbating. Oh, by the way,
I've gone a whiter shade of pale now.
Oh, sorry.
Which has just come into the charts. It's just come into the charts.
There you go. I haven't even got that far down because I went as far as Something Stupid by Nancy Sinatra and Frank Sinatra. And then at number 9, it was The Wind Cries Mary, Jimi Hendrix, The Boat That I Row, Old Neil Diamond song by Lulu. But at number 7, so 7 Drunken Nights, he comes home and he sees some strange pony where his pony should be. And his wife says, that's no pony. That's a jumper that my mother sent me from, back home. He's like, oh, gosh, okay. Then he comes home the next day again and he sees like there's somebody's coat hanging on his coat rail. And his wife says, that's no coat, you drunken fool. That is just, my handbag on the... And he comes home the next day. Anyway, every day he comes home, there's some other sign. He's coming home drunk late at night and he sees a pair of shoes, a pair of boots by his bedside that aren't his pair of boots. And his wife says, you drunken fool, that's not a pair of boots, those are my spectacles or whatever it is, And then he sees somebody's head sticking out of his bed, some bloke with a beard. And She goes, that's no head of a person. You drunken fool, that's just a plate on the bed. And the two verses they can't do, well, you can guess what they are.
I'll check it out.
Honestly, it's a proper
competition.
That is like, it's like the Pogues before the Pogues. It's like, a Fairy Tale of New York before, the Pogues guy and Kirsty MacColl. It's like that, honestly, but it's like before that, and it's a brilliant track, mate. It was a good time for a drunken night, not just for Scottish fans in Lisbon, but also for the charts at that time.